Then in the training phase, you're having some state-of-the-art models, you're working on that, debugging and all of that. And then you realize for implementing a state-of-the-art or doing the baseline, I have two limits. So you go back on the drawing table again, start collecting the data. Your labeling that you have done is not reliable when you were doing the training, and you realize that you need to debug that. Again, to the drawing table, realize task is too hard, requirement trade-off with each other, revisit the requirement in that case.
Excuse me. So if I were to take an example of a predictive analysis,
Yeah.
what would you consider as a good amount of data? Let's say I want to identify a car. What amount of data would you think is good amount?
Yes, it's a very relative question. So if for a machine learning project, it primarily depends on what is the problem. So for a deep learning model, they're very hungry towards data. So you might require a lot of data. But let's say for analytical solutions, or maybe let's take up an example of e-commerce. For a click-through rate, which is pretty common, you require a lot of data to do that. But can it be done with lesser data? Yes, it can be, but then what is your baseline? If your baseline is, I'm good with 80% accuracy towards predictive forecasting, then I'm maybe okay about it. But if I have to increase the predictability, maybe I require a lot more data also. It's a very, very relative question, but on a deep learning model always require a lot of data to work upon. Yeah. Does that answer your question? But I can try more.
Yeah. So let's say if I want to identify among a set of millions of images, I want to identify a car.
Yeah.
Let's say it's an image recognition solution.
Okay.
So what amount of data would be required to identify an object as a car?
Okay, so let me try a different track to explain this. Let's say in millions of data, your only task is to classify a car. Then maybe the million images is okay. But if your task is to classify just about every, yes, then you might require more data. It depends on how many classes are distributed in those million images data set. And that's the relativity of what I was coming to, yes. Moving forward, then again, at deployment and testing stage, what you realize is, in your lab, you have done a good project, but when it came to the deployment stage, your results are very, very, very different. And what might have been different in this case? A lot of time what happens is, as he was just mentioning, how much data. So I sampled on some of the data. And for that sampling, I did the machine learning project. And this is what my model is trained on. But you realize in the real world, there is some data that I have not seen before or not trained before on. And then it becomes a problem. So you realize when you go into the real world state, your data is different. In that case, you need to capture more data and then go back and do the whole cycle again. That happens a lot, and that happens all the time. We'll touch upon those cases as well. It's just a iterative thing that I'm mentioning over here. One interesting thing can also happen is the metric that I was trying to say is, let's say you're saying accuracy should be 80%. Who decides the accuracy? Be clear on the metric word that I'm emphasizing a couple of times, right? So let's say your forecasting method is, or a predictive method is that I should achieve an 80% accuracy. What does that mean? That means it should translate for a business. I mean, it's a business project that you're doing. It should translate to something towards business dollars being coming in, or something like that. You're selling this service, or it's a solution. But then you realize that the metric that you mapped to your business success was the wrong metric altogether. And that is not how the consumer behavior is changing. So going back on the e-commerce example, you said 80% accuracy would translate into those many click-through rates, to the metric that you decided, and that was a bad assumption. Because when you went into production, you realized it's not translating to that. So in this case, you go back to the number one module again, you decide on the metric again, you do your data collection, training, if required data collection, and then you train your model again. That can also happen. For some of the projects, because machine learning is expanding into just about every industry, vertical, business problem, some of them are mature, like e-commerce, but some of them are not. So this also happens. So it's not surprising that it can't happen.
So
I have a question.
Sorry.
Yes.
That's okay. Go ahead.
So metric keep on changing. Like it's not in the beginning you decide or you stick to one unless you reach the last stage.
It's a assumption that you make based on the data that you have seen that my achievement is a click-through rate, but and for that accuracy in my model should be good enough. But then there are hundreds of metrics that you can look at. Precision is one of them. Recall is one of them. There are other ones also for the guys who worked on machine learning projects. MSE is one of them. So you need to decide which one translate to a business result. That's the assumption that you make. Sorry.
I have the question about the second part, that's data collection and labeling. So like we were discussing about having billions of records wherein we will be having different interpretation about each one of them. So how does that labeling part is done? Is that done manually, going through each of the records and then setting them? Because there's always a, you're trying to tell that this is going to get clustered into one particular segment.
Absolutely.
And unless until you, and every time it will be a different interpretation of each one of the records. So going through the million records and then getting that interpretation for one clustering is a really big task.
Straight answer is yes, it's manual.
It's manual. So there is no automatic
That's
way.
why you pay for doing all of that. You
Okay.
can do a lot of design innovation in getting it labeled. One of the examples that comes to my mind is for Facebook, it's detecting your faces and it's giving you a recommendation towards who is this. So you are labeling that. But it also gets, people pay companies to annotate the data also. There are certain ways now in which are primarily in research, which leads to annotation.
Okay.
But for the longest time, it's almost 90% of the time that it's been annotated by a human. And for autonomous cars, it's even more necessary that it's labeled by a human.
So does that increase the overall time frame of the entire project? Because
Yes.
like in your case, you are talking about autonomous cars and all. So we have been hearing since last so many years that Google or many other companies are working towards it. So does that increase the overall time span?
Time, cost, everything, yes. That's why I was trying to say in the earlier slides that you go back from here to here.
Yeah.
Because you realize that I do not have annotated data, or the assumption that I made that this much amount of data is good enough is not there. Go back to that. The project cost, the delivery, all of that changes. Yes.
Okay.
If I had to primarily expand this to a cross-project infrastructure, so in the first section I was talking about more from the team and hiring, and the second one was more from the infra and tooling side. And if I expand this more on a per project activity, I was talking about in the first one, define project goals, choose a metric, evaluate the baselines, and then code setup. In the second ones, I was talking about data collection and all of that was strategy, ingestion. Data ingestion was also one of the, and the data management also is one of those parts. Then comes the training and debugging, which model to choose, what to implement, and you have deployment and testing after that. I'll start from the first one. So on the planning and the project setup part, the first thing is prioritizing the project and choosing goals. So I take our company's example only over here is there is a whole lot of things that you can solve in the e-mobility space, which can be object classification is one of them, path definition of where the vehicle is going to move. There are hundreds and thousands of them. So how do you prioritize which project to work on, and how do you choose a goal? And second is the metric that I was talking about, and then is the baselines. Any intuitive ways to understand? I mean, you guys also work on different software applications, and there are multiple requirements that come. So how do you choose those? Is my question clear? How you prioritize your requirements? Yes. Is there a thumb rule that you can use? What is the most intuitive thing that comes to your mind?
Highest value.
Highest value, absolutely. So that interprets towards a
What's most required gives, whatever is the outcome,
Yes.
gives the most credence to that outcome.
Okay, so impact is a reasonable word to say.
I mean, if you don't do that, then the outcome, the highest impact will be there.
Highest impact. Okay, so impact is what I hear. What can be the other thing that comes to your mind?
The effort required.
Effort required. Okay. So which translates to what, ma'am?
Money.
Absolutely. So feasibility, I think it's a reasonable word which covers effort, cost, and all of that.
The ones which have maximum dependency for the rest of the
Yes, so the project can also move forward. Okay. This is the simple framework. High impact, high cost. You can have unreasonably difficult problems to solve. So feasibility is less, but impact is high. But can you move forward in that? Difficult. Maybe you require a lot of data to do that. Or maybe your team has to be very mature to achieve some of that. Or it's in research that we are talking about, that problem or algorithm is in research. So then the feasibility is low, but the impact is high. So you choose on the low hanging fruits. That's a very popular word. You move to the right and top quadrant, high priority projects. In a definition to all of that I'm saying is primarily economics of AI, which is given by a paper, Agrawal, Gans, and Goldfarb. On the result is primarily the implication. Look for projects where cheap prediction will have huge business impact. Cheap prediction covers feasibility, and impact is, it gives you money back. Cost drivers. It stacks up from data availability, accuracy requirements, and problem difficulty. So by that perspective, the data availability is how hard is the data to get, how expensive is data labeling, how much data will be needed. We talked about this. Accuracy requirement is how costly are wrongly predictions. So can somebody talk about what does this mean? How wrong are the predictions? Can cost the company?
If we are predicting a disease or health disease, then a false positive would be disastrous in that case. So reliability, accuracy, or even a bank fraud, detecting a bank fraud case by default, if we have only 2 cases happening around in a data set of 100, so we already have an accuracy of 90%, 98% there. But predicting a wrong person as a defaulter, we are getting penalized for that, and leaving a defaulter, we are getting penalized other way also.
Great example. I hope everybody understands what he just said. So he's saying that from 100 data points, there are 2 fraud points, data points in the credit card fraud detection problem, and so you already have a 98% accuracy. If you do not do anything, and you just pick up one of those data points and say, what is the how accurate I am. So out of 100 times, you're 98 times correct. But those 2 times that you're wrong can cost the company a lot of money. And this translates to the conversation that I was doing on what is the metric. Is accuracy the right metric? Because out of 100, 98 seems pretty big, and that is already established in the data. So what is the metric which is required in this case?
Precision.
Sorry?
Metric would be precision in that case.
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. How frequently does the system need to be right to be useful, as we just said? Main considerations for problem difficulty is good published work on similar problems available? I'm saying that, e-commerce, again, a lot of problems of, recommendations, of, what you need to see, market basket problems, of what is that you're trying to buy, what is your click-through rate. These have been there for a while now, so it's good published work, even in production. But in research, there are companies which are investing so much into some of the other, not so much in production, like again, autonomous cars is one of them. And a lot of work is in research. So if I choose some of those, then my difficulty is pretty high. Then comes from the part of, how much compute is required in training. So I might require multiple GPUs to train my model on. Is my org ready for that? Maybe no. Second is also compute available for deployment. So let's just say I have a deep learning model or a big model which is giving like a fabulous accuracy. But I need to primarily put that into production somewhere, and let that be my phone over here. So I have all these apps, Google apps, Maps, and all of those, which runs machine learning on my edge device. So if I have gigs of a deep learning model, can I deploy that on my phone? No. And this is where the compute available on deployment talks about. The inference time, the inference is the predictive time to come back and give you a prediction, needs to be reasonable for the predictive, the entire chain to work efficiently. This is what it talks about. But primarily, the accuracy requirement is something that we should focus the most on, and that's how we move in the next slides, choosing the metric. The gentleman talked about the health disease one. Coronavirus is something that we read these days in the newspapers, news everywhere. So let's just say you have a population and you need to develop a classifier which in the population decides about who's the disease carrier. At the airport you need to deploy that. So you need a classifier on that. Let's say your classifier classifies that and you have two classes. If this is not readable, these are the positive classes and the negative classes. Positive primarily means that these are the guys you need to classify. So the red guys are the right people that you have classified, but there are a bunch of other guys which the classifier classified wrongly. And then you have negative classes which have been predicted, and there's one guy which has come wrong in this case. So now talking about the metric, because we're talking about the metric. What is the metric do you think by looking at this slide is the metric that we should be looking at? I can maybe help you with looking at this. Intuitively, don't go on the math, don't go on the technicalities, but intuitively, what do you think should be your classifier here? Sorry, your metric here. Should you be looking at people, most of them who are in the positive classes and some of them are okay? What is the metric that you should be looking at here?
No false negative.
No false negatives. And why do you say that?
Because then I spread the virus.
You spread the virus. So you are more concentrating on the false negatives. Okay. Any other answers?
Even false positive will have some impact.
So what is the impact from false positives?
Somebody who is not having any disease would be treated and would take it like as if he is
So
the
you'll be
guy.
quarantined. That's what we're doing with coronavirus, right? Yeah. So, but what is, because we also talked about the cost of a wrong prediction. So what is more important here? The cost for a false positive or a false negative?
False negative.
False negative. Absolutely. Absolutely. this is confusion metrics. Confusion metrics captures just about all of that, but you need to put that into a metric. Precision and recall are something that I have taken up. There are other ones also. But recall primarily focuses most on the false negatives. So it's called the true positive rate. This is what you are focusing on. But this slide also talks about a little different thing, which is I have a model 1 which gives me those metrics, then I have a model 2, and I have a model 3. Which one do you think should be the model that I should put into production? Or I should choose? So I'm telling you recall is the important one, but with these results, what is that you choose? Which model? It's not a trick question.
Model 3.
Model 3, yes, absolutely, it's very high. But what's the cost in case the precision goes wrong? Low, sorry. Which means, as Pam was just saying, you are also taking up negative patients, negative class patients as for quarantining them.
Are you losing credibility as well? Because if you are false positive, people might not rely on your tool. They will say the credibility is at stake.
Yeah, I mean, that's tertiary to, that can also happen. But the first impact is your quarantine, right? Yeah. So while the focus is absolutely on recall, I do not want a classifier in which it's been quarantining a lot of other people also. So what I'm trying to say is, you definitely start with one metric, but there can be a case where you need to maybe combine the metric also, which is you want to do a weighted metric over here. So some weight to precision, but more weight to recall, which is in machine learning terms is called a F1 score or a F beta score, usually called as. So weighted average of both can also happen. Then there can be also something which is called as a thresholding of a metric, which you are saying that, hey, I need the best recall score, but your precision should not go beyond 0.8. So my threshold is that I should reach this, and then whatever max that you can reach in recall, because it has to be credible. So 80% is okay in precision, and that's the threshold, but you maximize on one metric, which is recall. Any questions on this before we move forward? Okay, so choosing baselines. I have two graphs over here. This is from a model which is ResNet. It's pretty popular in deep learning. It's a pre-trained model. But because we were talking about baselines, what I want to say in this is your model remains the same, which is ResNet, but your baseline is different. This can be for one problem, this can be for the other problem. So based on what you're trying to solve, is one for human intelligence, in both of them you're trying to beat. One can be for autonomous cars, but one can be maybe for a very, very different problem. But the model remains the same. So baselining is important. People don't focus on baselines. I have often seen they do not have a start, and that's why they start from just about everything, but they don't know what to benchmark on. And that's the reason I am, talking about baseline and metric accuracy is something that I have seen a lot of ML teams, the best of them, not focusing or emphasizing on. I'll move forward quickly from this as this becomes more technical if I start explaining. But primarily you have external baselines. External baselines is business and engineering requirements that the business says that you need to achieve this much. That can be an external baseline, but the internal can be you already have a BGP network or a ResNet network and that's your baseline. So a combination of that is how you work. So we reach towards closing that out, and I want to move forward in front tooling. Before I move over there, any thoughts, any questions that you might want to pick? I might be a little fast because I have a lot of slides to cover, and there's a lot of them. So any questions that you have, I would like to take them now.
Will you be sharing the slides with us?
I'm afraid no. This is the IP for the company. So
Is there a percentage bit of effort required or timeline required for each of these 4 major phases?
no straightforward question. It can be industry dependent. Yeah. So you're in domain for maybe e-commerce or financial institutions. They might have, but as at large, I think you would be unreasonable to the kind of problem that
It
you're
will
trying
be
to solve.
two problem contexts.
Absolutely, yes. So within the industry, the mature industry might have some of that, yes. But for a machine learning exercise, specifically just about machine learning and not the whole organization of things, we also run the agile sprints in this case. So, and it was difficult, it's not similar to what the software agile ecosystem, I mean, it's not mapped the same way, because my model might be training for 3 days, and then I fail towards in some of those. But going back to, in this case is, you need to evolve towards what is best, what is the sprint size, or what is the duration that is best. You move in that direction.
Probably, just some would you validate the most complexity within that lying between the one, of course, you can choose the metrics first, but then when you implement the model and then train it and then get the feedback and rework, iterate between that primarily, and data availability and training, that being the most unknown, so to say, elements which increase the complexity rather than
Okay, so
What
data
element?
availability, I mean, once you're frozen on the what is the project about, data availability is the prime thing that you need to worry on. And if the data is not labeled, then you are in there for a very long project cycle. Yes.
Is the middle 2 areas which you take right?
Yes, but then something also can happen is if there are no baselines available, that it's a new problem. If there is no baseline, then you are into an uncharted territory. That I have a lot of data, but it's not making sense from my predictive system. Then you are again for a longer cycle. But for model training and all of that, at least with me, I have been doing that for the 10-day cycle works pretty well for us. Yes. In that, we want to cover some of the models once the data is available. Some of the model training and all of that. So 10-day cycle works pretty much for us. But it can be shorter as well. Yes.
I have a question on the metrics part. So when we are choosing a metrics, so what if there is no clear winner for any particular metrics? Like if we were talking about the click-through rates. Click-through rates are generally directly proportional to the visibility of the products. So what if the visibility is not high, although the product is good, and the click-through rate is dependent on that particular part? Then how do you actually solve that particular problem? Because in order to come to that matrix, you have to take another matrices into
Correct.
consideration.
So have you heard of something which is called as A/B testing?
Yeah.
So what you can improve on is once you should have some static that this is my standard, this is what I'm maintaining. So if your model needs to improve your current situation, you need to make that similar. And then only you know that it's been improving or not improving. So to come back to your question, if you're saying in the page if something is not correct, so that is the given that I have. Now to solve that also, then that means where should I put the block that the customer needs to click on or something like that. That's a different machine learning problem altogether. a recommendation of what should come above and below is also a machine learning problem. That might translate to a click-through rate. So that's how you. So click-through rate is not something that you have click-through rates data and then you start working. But if you believe that by improving your real estate on your web page improves your click-through rate, then you should be working more on that. And that can be also a machine learning problem. There is a lot of work going on in that space. If you have heard of reinforcement learning, if any of you, this is a primary area where all the e-commerce companies are working towards. What comes first? What is that dynamically my unique customer should look at? Yes. Did I answer your?
Yeah, actually, I mean, what I was looking forward to is, what if you do not have a clear winner? I mean, what if there is because click-through rate was an example. So my question is basically, what if there is no clear winner in terms of matrices? Then how do you decide? So if there is dependency among the matrices, so you cannot just go for each one of them and improving each one of them and then going to the last one.
So a combination of metric and something that can happen, that you think 2 metrics or 3 metrics is something that should go through. You're only making the problem to solve complex, but yes, that is always there. So going a little abstract in the business terms, that comes as a business requirement that hey, this is the minimum that you should achieve, but you have to improve on different metric altogether. This comes from a Google paper written a few years back upon the technical debt, and that was also the abstract that I've written for the today's talk. So if you see all of this in the entire ecosystem, to all the blocks that I've shown you, ML code is just the tiny bit. It's a lot of configuration, data collection, feature extraction, data provenance, serving infrastructure, and all of that. So it's pretty much little to, I think you were talking about it, right?
Okay.
So this cycle to work on the code is pretty much small, but everything in a relative context is the time that you spend on the other things. This is where I wanted to introduce on the apps, everything in the data collection, development, evaluation, and deployment. These are the tools at large, some open source, some as a platform as a service or a software as a service. These are some of them. I'll take up each one of them quickly, but maybe I'll pretty much start from the development, training, evaluation perspective first. So like anything else, you have software engineering, which covers your Python code or your Git, your Jupyter Notebook. So it's a prereq. I mean, I'm not covering the details of this. We all are available on this. But then comes the framework. What frameworks do you use? Which one do you use? And who is doing what? I am not covering the plain vanilla, and this is not exhaustive. There are a lot of other frameworks, but pretty much the most popular ones is what I have put up to. The y-axis talks about good for production, the x-axis talks about good for development. TensorFlow, which the corporate houses and everything that is in production, a lot of guys like TensorFlow. So it's good for production, you can deploy the models. But you go to the research community, everybody is moving to PyTorch. So it's good for development use cases. So the middle ground over here is, and each one of these working, they want to be better in research and they want to be better in production frameworks. Keras is a high-level wrapper on top of TensorFlow, which everybody likes. It's easy to work on, and yeah. Caffe and all that is also there, but that's again more in the research community.
Also, the reason I think is because TensorFlow is from Google, So anyway, when the giant pushes something, people will follow.
So PyTorch is also from Facebook.
Yeah, but PyTorch, I mean, it's a framework. So as a programmer, I would like to go to high-level language because I'm not a researcher. But at PyTorch, I have more flexibility on the code I want to write. At the framework level, I can directly have an API which will do everything for me.
Absolutely, that's what I said. One is really good for the introduction, and the other one is for the research.
Probably depends upon what type of problem are you trying to solve. Is it in a too much of a unstructured space wherein research is required and you want to develop a go-to product solution? You might use one to
While I know a few of you have machine learning projects going, but in maybe your teams, but at a org level, is machine learning something which is not happening at all? From maybe raise of hands, I have a little idea. So my question is, in your organization, is machine learning something that you are absolutely not thinking or not working at? You are
Not working.
not
thinking.
as an industry, as an organization, but everybody.
I can't imagine anybody who's not thinking.
The trouble right now is everybody is thinking, but they don't know that whether machine learning AI is the right thing for them to even look at. Everybody's just jumping on the bandwagon.
People are taking baby steps right now.
Okay. Yeah, I agree to that. Why I asked the question is also because where is the development happening for this machine learning project that you do? It's happening on your local machines, or you require a cloud infrastructure for that. And I was trying to motivate the next slides to what is the right place to train your models and set up your training exercise or the experimentation exercise. There is start is always maybe working on CPUs and all of that, but then you quickly realize that you need to collaborate within the team. It's not one-man army or two-man armies. So suddenly people realize better than setting up the infrastructure in their own organization. Why not move to the cloud, get the deep learning images or machine learning images for your VM and start working. They're popular ones, I'm sure each one of you know about them. There is no surprises here. AWS, Google, and Azure. There are a lot of other ones also. I think I have those as well in the other slides. But these are the heavyweights. AWS and Azure are really popular. We go to resource management. So let me talk about, we have a pretty big team, and that translates to, and it's not like it's cheap. GPUs are expensive. GPUs is a graphic processor unit. It's expensive. To deep learning models, you require those a lot, and those are expensive. So what do you do about that? If you have a team of 30 or 40 who works on the GPU, you need to do allocation of that. So we go back to the 80s where you have one person allocated to a time. Yeah, you can work for 2 hours and then you go back. So spreadsheets, you have people put up who works on what, you allocate time, and it's not common, but yes, it happens. Then there is an intelligent way, a little bit intelligent. Not that wasn't, but as you move bigger in the sizes for the team, you can do scripts. I am allocating a 24 GB GPU, maybe 8 GB to one, 16 to the other one. That can be done in scripts. Part of our team follows that because we can't put our data on cloud for privacy purposes. Our team follows this, but then everybody is not doing that. So you always have a Docker and a Kubernetes setup. Everybody knows about the Docker and Kubernetes, right? Show of hands, or maybe I can. Okay, so a lot of you know about it. So for this, you wrap your code base into a container, Docker container. You put that onto a Kubernetes, and then you start training. The Kubernetes cluster decides which node to work on that. And then there can be complexities to how are you training your model. It's data parallelism or model parallelism, which means you are parallelizing the data, the model. Sorry. Or you're parallelizing the data. It's different to the distributed data processing, which Spark is. This is different to this. From data engineering side, there is also that. I am not talking about that.
So can you elaborate a bit on the scripts that you spoke about?
So you decide on. You map a person to a particular allocation within the GPU.
Okay.
So you can say that you can work on 8 GB of a 24 GB GPU. So you can do that. So you put that into a script.
Okay.
So you are allocating out of the GPU already.
Right.
It doesn't do any runtime dynamic shift allocations
If you want to make it more complex, yes. Yeah, but most of the time, the machine learning engineers want to focus on their work rather than making it life difficult for them. Yes. There's always a fight. There's always a fight to who works on how much. Angry team members. Yeah.
But we do have those Intel Movidius USBs, right? Intel Movidius solutions, Movidius Intel pen drives, which are providing like GPUs on a pen drive, right? You just plug it and they have the framework ready. I mean, kind of an intermediate solution between local GPUs and the cloud.
Yes. So it depends on how much you need. So if I give one of those solutions to every team member, then maybe one is it comes with only 8 GB or 12 GB, but I require a big size. Or maybe he requires a lesser size and I'm giving him more allocation.
He'll be happy.
We work on HPCs. So with an HPC, I have the comfort to do all of that. So I can define how much to whom, depending on how much is he training today or for how many days. Yeah, but there are solutions, that's why they are made. Yes, you're right on that. Then there is more from a framework side, which is for distributed training. This comes from NVIDIA. This is an open source framework. Hollowwood, this runs pretty well for TensorFlow, Keras, and PyTorch. It achieves both data and model parallelism. Data parallelism is when in multiple nodes you are parallelizing on the data, but your layers in the deep learning remains the same. But in model parallelism, what you're doing is your deep learning layers to get parallelized in different nodes. It becomes more complex, but Hollowwood is something that is made for that. Experiment management. Experiment management is about, let's say hypothetically, we have a team of 7, 8, or 10 people, and they're running their experiments. In the experiment with each run, maybe you might appreciate this. You are running experiments, and with each experiment, you are changing maybe some hyperparameters or your different model that you're trying to work on. I don't know what IDE you use, maybe a PyCharm or a Jupyter Notebook. What you will end up doing is you change something, then you go back and you change something, but you're not logging it anywhere. And that is just up to you. Just assume what you're doing, a team of 10 is also doing the same thing. So you are not reproducing what you might have worked before, or you don't know what worked best for you. And this is where something called as an experiment management comes into play. What I'm trying to clear over here? Not really. Let's say there is a model training which one person is doing. And with that, let's say I am trying maybe a gradient boosting machine model. and I have to tune up the model, which means by every run, I am changing something in the model to give me an accuracy or some metric, which means I have a log of 1 that I am trying to achieve. But when I am trying a lot of things, I am not logging it anywhere, and not are the artifacts of that I am logging, which means the graph that I am trying to achieve or the accuracy that I am trying to take up from there, I am not logging anywhere. What experiment management does is, it logs everything that you're doing, right or wrong, whatever, it logs everything. So you can, after doing all of that exercise, that is one place where you can run stats also on your experiments. That you know, this seems the best. If you're combining metrics, that can come handy also. There are a lot of companies which work on that, but this is something that I really like. We use this. This comes from the house of Databricks, called as MLflow. 100% open source, anybody can use it. There are 3 aspects to this. One is the tracking server. The tracking server primarily means whatever you're doing, as I just said, it tracks, it logs, and then you can use it maybe through a UI. It gives you a UI. It's a Python Flask application that runs, and you can see on the UI you can run stats, but you can also consume this through an API if you want to add that somewhere else in your application or your local experiment management if you're running. And then the second component to this is called as a project, which means whatever code base that you have a code base, you have a requirement, which is usually a YML file that you know I need these many libraries, and then you have the data. It puts that together. So all the logs that you have created with the experiments, it has logged that as different modules, and those are the artifacts. If you want to execute and reproduce that anywhere, anytime, today, tomorrow, or in different years, you can do that. It's 100% reproducible if your code is not error prone. You can put that onto a remote cluster also. The third module to this is something which is called as MLflow model, which means I like TensorFlow, but he likes PyTorch, and maybe somebody else is working on something called as a scikit-learn or sklearn. So how do I add that together? But I do not change the entire code base, and I can execute that anywhere else. This is where the MLflow model comes in. So they have 2 variants in this, which is called as a Python flavor and an Onyx. Onyx is an open exchange for different deep learning models. So you can add all those frameworks together. You do not need to change. You do not need to say that one team works on the entire team works on TensorFlow. They can work on everything that they want. You can put that together and you can deploy that anywhere. So this is very handy. This is not just experiment management, but this is primarily an all-in-one for me. I've come to all-in-one also, but this is very popular these days. They're doing a lot of exciting stuff.
So MLflow, apart from other artifacts, configurations, results, etc., logs, does it keep track of the versions of the data also?
Absolutely, absolutely. Data provenance is not something that they do. No. If your data has changed, no, that's not what they're looking at. But for that you have different. That comes into data management. If your data provenance and all of these cycle that have changed, that comes into there. Hyperparameter optimization. Hyperparameter optimization primarily means I have multiple hyperparameters within a model to train the model. You guys might be knowing what hyperparameters, right? So hyperparameters are, should I change my loss function? Should I, change my learning rate? And some of that. For decision trees is how many leaves or how many nodes or where you want to distribute that on. That is something that you play around with. And this is what you're doing all the time as a machine learning engineer. You're trying all of that. And you're primarily optimizing on a particular metric. So while you can do it, and there can be a faster and a better way, so there are a few SaaS solutions now, and one of them is SIGOPT. They're doing some state-of-the-art work. So what you do is you have a model ready with your data. You do not expose the data to them. You do not expose any of your artifacts. You just expose your model to them. What they do is through an API, they train up your model to the best hyperparameters which are required for the entire exercise. So they send back you the hyperparameters and hey, your model is ready, best optimized. That's what they're functioning on. They are, I think, a Bay Area-based startup, but they do good stuff. Then also is HyperS. This is absolutely free. This is also used by the machine learning engineers. This you integrate one line of code, optimize.minimize. You put that in your model, and it runs a search within that. It's not Toto to a grid search, which a lot of us know, but they optimize on different parameters also. It's not Bayesian, but this is a free open source. There are different ones also. I'm just covering one open source, one paid service. So while these are different modules, a lot of them put there, but there is something which is also called as all-in-ones, which take care of data development, training, and deployment together, which are called as all-in-ones. For the giants like Facebook, Uber, Google, they have put their own proprietary systems. And the first one to come up was actually Facebook, because they can't, they have not a team of 30, 40, they have their entire thing working on AI, a lot of them. So they have developed their own solution, which is called as FVLO. Now this is proprietary, it's not open source, but they're capturing just about everything, data, features, depending on what infrastructure do you have, inferencing, deployment, everything. Capturing the artifacts, what neuron is activating where, visualization, stats, everything is there. And then you have something which is called as from Uber, Michelangelo, which covers, and this is very high frequency data that they capture. So from data processing to putting that into model training, they have captured all, which is getting data, training models, eval, everything. But again, this is proprietary. And then you have something as a PaaS service, platform as a service, which is Amazon's SageMaker, which covers one-click deployment of Jupyter notebooks, your models. They have pre-built models, and then you can hyperparameter tune them within the SageMaker, and you have one-click deployment. But it's hardwired just to the AWS ecosystem. So you cannot have your on-prem clusters or GCP servers or Azure. It's just meant for AWS. It's expensive, but yes, for smaller teams it works well. The company doesn't have to work on expanding on all of that. And then this is open source, partly, but this covers building machine learning models. You can reproduce what you are doing. You have the same tools like TensorFlow, Caffe, PyTorch. You can collaborate between the teams anywhere, and then you can also integrate Docker into it for deployment. This has a command line interface as well as you can integrate that into your code. It gives you a UI also, yes. There's Floyd, and then there is also Paperspace. They are all the same. They are optimized for deep learning machines. It's also good. I think some of the variants are lesser cheaper than AWS. We come to data management. Data management, I'm not talking too much on this since this moves a little in the data engineering side of things. But primarily what you require, what kind of data do you store where? So binary data is something that you store as as objects into AWS storage. You might have a data lake where you store it. You need to version the data also. So all of that is into different tools and infrastructure you might have. You might also want something for labeling. So Prodigy and all of that is there. So a strategy towards should I require a SQL database or a NoSQL database or a data lake is good enough. All that is part of data management. I am skipping that for good reason because this is very extensive. I can take a pause here. Any thoughts? Maybe a quick rewind to whatever we did. Any pressing question that comes over here, and then maybe I can talk about it.
Okay. See, I just have one bread and butter question. So, an ongoing debate on Quora is will machine learning become a part of full stack development? Okay. And also, a lot of web and mobile developers are asking how important it is for me to learn machine learning. So, while data science in itself is a very large field, but do you think web and mobile developers will increasingly be expected to have applied ML skills as machine learning becomes more prevalent to introduce some amount of intelligence in their applications?
Okay. It's a career shift kind of a question. I am not, I might be biased here, but it's always good to know some of the technologies, but let's say it's said because developers on the mobile and the website. So what, from a perspective of application development, what TensorFlow has done, they've come up with TensorFlow.js. So if he needs to do something core to what he has been doing, but also put something in from machine learning side, it becomes easier for him.
Yes.
So the framework has enabled him from TensorFlow.js.
Yes.
But yeah, it's a cycle where people are moving towards data science, but we require a lot of other things also. So if everybody is doing data science, then who develops the application? So you require expertise in just about every domain. Yes. So UI developers are pretty hot these days. So you require expertise, React, Angular, like in the latest versions. You require over there also. So if they start doing data science, then how do you do the other work? But very subjective to what your interest is, where and what goes as we move forward. Data science, something which is called as an auto ML, where you have a machine learning model which is hyper-tuned already. So those are coming up. But would that make the other data science or machine learning engineers redundant? No, the difficult problems that need to be worked on, where humans are required for that. So it's a cycle. Okay, I have 13 minutes to go, so maybe I'll quickly move. Testing and deployment. Testing is a horizontal to everything that they do, and I can't emphasize enough that how important is testing in machine learning. When I say testing, the data science and the machine learning engineers, just take that to model accuracy. It's not about that. You need to make everything robust, that it doesn't fail into production. So we'll maybe talk about what we're trying to cover. One is what should be your project structure. How do you evaluate whether it is robust or not. So I'm trying to talk about something that we have worked around as a rubric to say that this ML model is ready for production. This comes from inspiration from some of the work that Google has done to set up a rubric, and we follow this. We have tuned this a little bit to our liking, but the rubric comes from Google. Going back again, so we have three systems: training, prediction, and serving system. So what training is, you process the raw data, then you run experiments, and then you manage your results. What that goes down is primarily that you are running data, you are running your experiments on the entire data. So every test is primarily to whether I am able to process the raw data, and I can do unit testing. You know, I can catch the upstream code regressions if I can do. Then I move to the prediction system. The prediction system covers two things. One is, but what is prediction systems first? You process the input data, not the raw data. That means you have the input data already, but you need to maybe, if your model requires some kind of a feature engineering, so are you doing some processing on that? Then you construct networks with trained weights. With deep learning models, you have data and then you have weights. You put that into production, and that's how every construct comes for prediction. Validation is primarily that you are doing the processing right or not for the input data, not the raw data, and then you are running your model regressions again. From a functionality test, is primarily regressions, but also how fast is your inference time is something that comes more in the functionality side of things. For the serving system, what you're checking is primarily whether my metric, whatever it was doing, is translating to a business benefit or not, or the performance has reduced for a CTR or not. So all that is the alerting and the monitoring system that you deploy. As I said, I'm using the rubric made by Google. I'm just motivating this back again from where I started the development cycle of machine learning and software development. Usual cycle, unit testing, then you have CI test, integration, and then you have system monitoring in this cycle. But then from the machine learning software side, there are a lot of moving parts. You have unit tests, but you have integration between model testing, model training, and running systems, which means you're testing your infrastructure, you're testing your model, you are testing your data sets, and you're also testing, hey, whether my data has altogether changed or not. So let's say for autonomous cars, my model is trained for hilly area, somewhere in Europe, because we're a German company, so a lot of data comes from there. But if I need to deploy the same car in maybe Gurgaon roads, what has changed? Data has changed, and my data is not aware to that, which means it's not one model is the prime hero, it has changed. So data distribution is something that you need to track all the time. And that translates to how your model is performing. So those tests is something that you need to do all the time in the machine learning software side. Prediction monitoring is also there. So everything that you see green or somewhat green is ML infrastructure test, and then you have the pink ones for machine learning, the prediction side, and then the serving side is data check, predictive modeling check, data monitoring check, and all of that. Maybe some of you can read this. This is tiny, but I have put, this is the rubric that I was talking about. Some of the tests maybe for model is all hyperparameters are tuned or not. A simple model is not better, so I need to maybe make something else. This is a rubric for ML infrastructure. Maybe the model can I read before serving, which means I have to do. I have a new model that I have created, and I need to put that into production, but I need to check it. So that's what is called as model canary. That you put that into production, but you do not. Your existing production system doesn't go down. And a rollback is also one of the functions. In software that also happens, but for model it becomes more important. So all those tests are primarily put that into a rubric. And what I have done is, what each one of them I have a scoring system. So if the test is manual, then I give a 0.5 score, but if the test is automatic, then it's a 1 now that I am giving. You sum up each one of them, and then you take minimum of all 4. And that translates to how many points that I have gathered. Let's just say I have gathered only 0 points. That means my model is as good as a research project. The entire thing that I've developed is as good as a research project. Maybe I'm just working on a Jupyter notebook, so it's just good about that. One or two mean that it is a first pass to productionization, but you need to invest more time into making it more robust. 3 and 5 is somewhere which is acceptable. Strong levels of automation testing and monitoring appropriate for mission critical systems. So this is very important for at least for us, because a failing on the road can be disastrous. This is for our continuous integrations. There is no one good tool available, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, since these software guys pretty much are doing a lot of stuff already. But the usual suspects, Jenkins, Circle CI is something which is popular within the community. But yeah, there is no one SaaS tool that I see, and maybe if you guys know, you can let me know, but I don't see that over here. There are two deployments that you can do. One is web-based and other is edge-based. For good reasons, I can't talk about edge-based because I might have to talk a little bit on what the code that we do. So I'm maybe going to touch on only web deployment. Web deployment, usually REST API. You have your model somewhere in the cloud, and you have a HTTP access, and you have an API exposed to that. Cloud computing, how many of you understand that? Okay. But you are aware of what cloud computing is. Okay. So there are different ways where you can deploy the model. To start with, what you do is you spin up your own VMs, and then you deploy your code over there. You have a load balancer, and the consumer is consuming those. Good to work if the traffic's not too high, but the problem is it can be brittle. One is your provisioning is you're setting up your own VMs. One thing can go down because of good reasons. Second is you're paying for uptime of all instances all the time, and the surge in the traffic is something that you do not cover through this. So for starting out, it should be okay, but it's not something that you can scale up upon. And then you have the Docker Kubernetes setup. So you have your code, you put that into Docker, you put that on Kubernetes. It's pretty popular. The only con, if I have to say, and I'm just nitpicking over here, is you still pay for the uptime, not the compute, which means how many REST APIs I am hitting, it's not on IOPS. I am only talking about the uptime of the clusters which are running in the Kubernetes. I might be slightly wrong also over here, because now Azure or AWS are also coming up with something which is called IOP-based billing, but that has been the large construct till now. Yeah, so there are newer things which are coming. Yeah, that's the larger perspective of this. So the spike and all of that is covered with the Kubernetes system. You can keep your VMs warm in case you expect some of that. Let's say for Amazon, for the sales season when that comes in, to keep their VMs warm. So there's a sudden spike and it can scale up. And then there is also something which is called as Lambda functions, Azure functions. So what did you do is you zip up your code, you put that into a function. It's always warm, ready, but what you do is you're putting, and this again is on compute basis and not uptime basis. So if you have not very heavy traffic, because it's expensive if the traffic becomes heavy, then this works pretty well. And you can roll back, you can canary your model. It has a lot of good features. So for medium kind of traffic, based on what industry you are in, for web deployment, this can be a good solution. I come to the last part where monitoring is there. This again, you do not have a whole one SaaS solution because it's very dependent on the industry. So there is no one solution, yes. There's some of them, but the idea is to log the results, the log changes in the data, traffic and all of that. Alerting system is something that also happens, that if something has been broken or there is a spike, it alerts your data engineering team or your data science team is something that is not there in this setup, but data engineering guys, for sure, it requires all of that. Last part is Exchange. Onyx is something that I covered in between somewhere. So it captures all the frameworks and you can deploy it. Some of the computers which are using, Qualcomm is using Windows, Mac OS, all of these. MXNet comes from Amazon, the homes of Amazon. Cognitive Toolkit comes from Microsoft, PyTorch, Facebook, and so forth. Yeah, this is where we end. Any questions we can take if we have? I'm looking at organizers. I'm looking at you actually. I'm out. So if you can allow, maybe we can have 5 minutes if people have questions.
So probably we have 2 minutes. Quickly, you can ask the questions. You can take it up.
So you might be overwhelmed to the speed and the amount of information and not everybody from machine learning, yes.
Topic is like that.
Yeah. I am reachable on LinkedIn in case you have questions. If nobody has anything right now, you can always write to me. Okay.
Really good here.
I guess you all enjoyed the session. It was a wonderful one, I guess.
Thank you so very much for sharing so much of knowledge. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is just token of love from our side. Right? Thank you so much. If you just there. Yeah.